Okay, good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. We appreciate you being with us here at Westchester County Airport to discuss some of the plans that we have to deal with issues that relate to the airport. I'm joined by our Director of Operations. Is this magnifying my voice or not? Is this going into the media? All right.
It's going directly into the camera.
All right. So if I speak more loudly for the room, I'm going to sound like Howard Dean screaming in the press conference. So I've got to watch the modulation. I'm joined today by Joan McDonald, who's our Director of Operations. She has direct responsibility through the Commissioner of Department of Public Works, Hugh Grecian, for the operation of the airport. Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins is with us, and our County Attorney John Nona is here. I'm also joined by our Chief of Staff, Andrew Ferris, our Director of Communications, Catherine Chaffee, and the County Legislator for the 6th Legislative District, Nancy Barr, is with us here, represents this physical district. Excuse me, Peter McCart, who is our environmental and energy person on our executive team, is here with us, and Dennis Power, who's Chief of Staff for the Westchester Board of Legislators, is with us. And if I have missed anybody else within the county family, I'll make sure that we announce it. This is a continuation of a dialogue that has begun already, talking about the issues that relate to the operation and the structure of this county airport. Back in May, I held a press conference in the county office building where I laid out a game plan that had 4 elements to it at the time. What we were going to do with the master plan, what we were going to do on the issue of governance, which has previously been called privatization, but is in fact a change in governance of the airport. What are we going to do about operation issues and what the impacts are? And then also, what are we going to do in terms of community input and public involvement? And so this is a status report on those different issues. This is not meant to be comprehensive on every element of issues here at the airport. There are things that are still being worked on in progress, things that we haven't yet had a full circumstance on. But at the time that we had that press conference back in May, I indicated that for community involvement, we would have a series of public forums, 3 of them in the month of June, which we've conducted. We had one in Rye Brook where we talked about master plan issues. We had one in Armonk where we talked about the governance issue. And we had one in West Harrison where we spoke about operations.
The reason for your delay today is a late arrival of equipment due to weather. The aircraft is currently in air with the arrival time at Westchester County Airport at 2:38 with a new departure time of 3:18. Thank you.
For all of you waiting for that flight, sit back, relax, and enjoy the press conference. So at the time, we had 3 public hearings, and at those public hearings, each were about 2 hours in duration. We heard from everybody who wished to speak, and they each had a chance to talk about the different topics that we had at that time. Also, in terms of the public input, I indicated that we were going to reconfigure the Airport Advisory Board, and we were going to bring on some new members in addition to the new ex officio members. Nancy took over as the Board of Legislators representative. Hugh in his capacity and Joan in her capacity became ex officio members. But we've also had a new representative for the town of Rye, Peter Schlachtis, who came referred to us by town leaders and our local county legislator. Tracy Levy from Pleasantville and Mount Pleasant, recommended by the county legislator and the local town board in Mount Pleasant. Robert Fleischer from Chappaqua, the town of Newcastle, came recommended similarly from the county legislator and the board. And then an at-large position where I appointed Jonathan Wang of Purchase, resident of Harrison.
Traveling on a confirmed ticket, please make your way to the service desk under the Just Ask sign at the gate.
That new Airport Advisory Board has met with new members. We expect that there'll be some additional changes to the advisory board, but already that board has taken on a different, more active role in discussing policy issues and so forth. So the area of open communications with the community, I think, has become much more profoundly different in honoring the commitment we made back in May. Maybe I'll just talk over this. What do you think? Okay. Now, there's more substantive elements to this, and the single most impactful area of the three other policy areas is the way the airport operates. The majority of concerns that we heard at the public sessions that we had revolved around residents who were concerned about noise and other related issues, air quality issues, people who were concerned about the water quality issues, particularly because we have our drinking reservoir sitting at the end of this runway, and we also have a drainage system that takes property water down the Blind Brook into the Long Island Sound. So we have established a couple of steps relating to noise monitoring, the noise complaint system, an effort for air quality monitoring and water quality monitoring. And to discuss some of those elements, Joan McDonald, who's been working on the implementation of the direction coming out of our 3 public forums, is going to address some of those issues. I'm going to take it back and then turn to John Nona, who will talk very briefly about the PFOA pollution, which is a very specific water problem issue, well issue in the area. And then after that, we're going to address where we are with the master plan. I'll bring Joan back to talk about our plans on the master plan. Then we're going to open it up to questions from the press so that you have a chance to interact. And you're certainly welcome to interview any of us after that in a one-on-one situation. If there are any non-airport related questions that anybody in the press has, we'll try to answer those, or I'll try to answer those individually after we complete everything that relates to the airport. So that's our game plan for today, with the thought in mind of dealing with noise monitoring, water monitoring, and air quality monitoring. I'm going to invite Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, to give us an update on what we're trying to do now to improve and change that system. Joan.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to first walk through the noise systems that we are putting in place, and then the air issues that we're going to address, and then turn it over to John for the water. As many of you that were at the meeting saw, we had a map that showed where some of the most frequent noise issues and the noise complaints that we had. And one of the issues that we faced was we did not have a sufficient number of noise quality monitors. So what we have done is we have ordered 10 portable noise monitors to assess the noise at various locations within the community. This is one of the first ones to arrive. The remaining 9 will all be here by August 31st, and we will put them in locations where the source has the largest number of complaints and where there is currently insufficient coverage by noise monitors. They will also be placed at locations that will enable us to check the accuracy of the complaints and validate the data from the current fixed monitors. Once we have sufficient data from these new portable monitors, we will be better prepared to move forward and address longer-term actions. On our fixed noise monitoring system, our current system is over 20 years old. What we have done is hired a consultant to assess the current system, assess the number and the location where the permanent noise monitors are, and to survey the best practices across the country so we can then issue an RFP and install a brand new state-of-the-art noise monitoring permanent system. So that's one part of it. That's the actual monitoring. What we've also heard loud and clear from everybody is how we actually track complaints. So we are in the process of automating our complaint response system. We've brought a new firm on board to do that. That system will provide us with quicker responses and a much more significant level of detail. It will streamline the process of filing a complaint and provide greater public access to noise complaint information and trends. We've been checking with other airports across the country, again looking at best practices on the complaint process, time to respond, etc. And all those new procedures will be put in place by September 1st. So we're looking forward to instituting those new programs so that you, the public, can hear back from what our course of action is. That's what we're doing on the noise monitoring side. On the air side, in 2007, an air emission inventory was done for the airport. It included greenhouse gases and 8 additional air pollutants. What we have discovered is that it is sometimes difficult to assess where the air pollution is coming from, the airport, 684, etc. But since then, the technology has gotten much more sophisticated. So what we have done since then is we've taken several actions to reduce emissions. We have transitioned to electric ground support and service vehicles. We have electric jet bridges, new boilers, newer, more efficient planes, and other fuel changes. But we are now updating that 2007 plan. We are starting a current inventory of those air emissions and greenhouse gases. We will create an air dispersion model and setting up an emissions monitoring system. That will start again at the end of August as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the water.
The county has been addressing various environmental issues with water and soil over many years at the airport. The most recent issue with PFASs, which perfluoride octane chemicals, arose relatively recently. In June of 2017, the Department of Health found that one property, a commercial property on New King Street, showed levels of these chemicals, PFOA and PFOSs, higher than allowed or higher than the standard that has been set. That was one of several properties tested. Based upon that, the Department of Environmental Conservation asked us to do testing for these chemicals at wells at the airport, mostly centering around an old Air National Guard site where these chemicals were used in firefighting foam, and a lot of training was done on fighting fires, and so the foam was used there. And several wells tested positive. Several of the so-called 14 wells that were tested, maybe 9 of them tested with positive results. We are in communication and in discussion with the Department of Environmental Conservation in order to address any remediation that needs to be done off-site and the continued testing of these wells. We are resuming the water quality testing, the water testing that was done at the airport, the monitoring in the wells that was ceased in 2011. We're commencing that at the end of this month, and that will include testing for all these PFAS chemicals. And that will be an ongoing process, and we will be telling the DEC about that and working that into any agreement or consent decree. Finally, we are in contact with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection to be in contact with them regarding their testing of Rye Lake and the Kensico Reservoir to make sure there's no levels of PFASs that are a problem in those important water sources, and so far there hasn't been, according to the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Meanwhile, we continue to monitor developments in this field as different environmental bodies are looking at the level of these chemicals that should be permitted, that should be regulated in any testing that's done, and we're continuing to do that. We're also following the litigation that's been brought by the state of New York against the manufacturers of these firefighting foams to determine whether we have any claim or cause of action to proceed. So that's where we are with the PFAS issue.
Just a couple of points before we move on to the master plan issue. First of all, the pollution from the PFOSs date back to the early 1980s when the chemical substance was used to fight fires, Air National Guard on this site. This is not something that's been done in recent years. We're seeing now what the impact is on the groundwater. We made a commitment, I said this verbally very early on in the administration, we will clean up whatever there is to clean up there. We didn't create this pollution, nor did our predecessor create this pollution, but we will make sure that it's cleaned up. We would like the State Department of Environmental Conservation to be a partner with us, because clearly we did not authorize the use of this, and at the time these chemicals were used, it was not clearly understood what the polluting process were. So we view this as a matter of science, not as a matter of policy. There is a substance that should not be in the groundwater. It should not be detected on private parcels, and it has to be cleaned up, and we intend to do that. But we'd like financial help to do it because, truthfully, we have limited amount of resources within a county government. In terms of reestablishing the groundwater testing program, which was just pointed out is going to start again at the end of August, that's a program of testing that should not have been stopped. It should have been maintained through. By us retesting it, we assume we're going to find something, and whatever we find, in the spirit of transparency, transparency, we're going to report on it. And if there are things that require changed policies here or changed financial efforts to remediate, we intend to do those things. We intend for us to have the reliability of the groundwater and the reliability of any drainage that comes from the water situation that John has been pointing out. I'll repeat again before we move on to the next stage that we have portable noise monitors, and we intend to change the permanent monitoring. We've seen a different pattern of flights over this airport. We've seen a heavy concentration over the route that takes in Pleasantville and Chappaqua into the airport, which was not what it was 10 years ago, when that airport was heavier flights coming in from other directions over Greenwich and coming in over Port Chester, Rye, and into Rye Brook. So we intend to try to attach these locations to where the greatest amount of current noise is. And what's the purpose of having noise monitors? To have data that we can then use to deal with the FAA, because they hold within their authority the ability to regulate the kind of equipment that comes in, the kind of air flight routes that are there. We've had a number of meetings with the FAA on a number of different topics, and we intend to continue a vigorous dialogue. The Airport Advisory Board will have this dialogue, and we know that there's a municipal airport advisory board in the town of Rye. There's a municipal airport advisory board in the village of Rye Brook. There's some of these other ones that exist out there, and they too are part of the public dialogue about noise and what have you within the operations. As far as the master plan is concerned, I said at the time back in May, I've laid this out, I'll repeat it again, that the master plan grant money was given to us in 2012. We were given a deadline of June 1st, 6 years later, 2018, to complete the process. When we walked in the door on the first day of January 2018, the process had not advanced sufficiently. There was no environmental review process that was attached to it. It was not in a position where it could be prepared and be sent to the Board of Legislators. So we submitted the plan as it was prepared up to that point. We attached the public dialogue that came from a July 2017 public hearing, which was critical of what the plan was, and in our cover letter, which was written and signed by Hugh Grecian, we pointed out what we felt the failings were of the master plan, and we were very clear about it. And we indicated that we were going to immediately start a master plan supplemental process, which in essence is saying we intend at this moment in time to amend the master plan, but to go through the proper deliberative process so that there's not only public dialogue about it, but there's an environmental review that's attached to it. It goes before the Board of Legislators for their approval, just as was done in the 1980s, the last time there was a full master plan. We are dealing with what we were handed, and we're trying to do the very best we can in order to address those issues. So to discuss where we're going on the master plan, I'll bring Joan back to address that, and then we'll go to general questions.
It's our plan to issue a new RFP to bring a new consultant on board to do the supplement to the master plan. We've been working on a draft internally. It will be shared with the Airport Advisory Board through the chairman. We will also seek input from various environmental groups, business groups, so that we have a broad spectrum of input. It is anticipated that this RFP, when we bring on a new consultant, we will have significant visioning sessions to get input from the community at large and to identify and to address all those issues that we felt were not addressed in the original master plan. So in accordance with George's philosophy, we will get inclusion, we will get input from the public through the various organizations to help guide us as we develop the scope of work. And then there will be significant public meetings, charrettes, etc., once we bring the new consultant on board. We felt it best to make a clean break from who the prior consultant was and move forward in that way, because it shows a new way forward and moving it ahead. Thanks.
Now there are two issues that are not addressed by what we're dealing with today. I mentioned the issue of governance. We had one of the public sessions were about governance, the proposals that came out in the past year. What I said at the time, and I repeat again, We are in general dialogue with the Board of Legislators. My predecessor twice proposed governance changes to the Board of Legislators that they twice chose not to act on. So rather than constructing a 2019 budget that presumes something like this, then we will continue to have dialogue with the Board of Legislators, and when we submit a budget in November, it will reflect the common dialogue between the administration and the legislature. I have not been a fan of changing the governance of the airport, but I'm willing to listen to whatever the dialogue is, and that dialogue will be informal at the outset, but we are going to have public sessions on the budget. And when those public sessions on the budget occur before the legislature gets the budget, we're discussing that now for the month of September, it is a perfectly appropriate public dialogue for a person to come and say, do not balance the budget on a governance change. So that is an opportunity for the public to be heard on that element as reflects the county budget. That's on governance. We also know there's a lot of issues relating to fixed-based operators. In our discussions, we have not yet reached a game plan of what we're going to do with fixed-based operators. Some of them want expansion of their services. Some of them believe that the existing services they have are properly cited and properly analyzed. We don't know if that's true or not. We have to look at that more closely. But at this stage of the game, these were the immediate concerns that we had that came out of the meeting that we have control over. We can put the monitors in. We can put the air quality monitors in. We can change the complaint process. We can do the POF remediation. A lot of these things we can do ourselves without needing FAA support. There are things we're going to need to do FAA support. The fact that we did in fact meet the deadline on the master plan, I think gives us credibility with the FAA, because I expect what's going to come out of the next round of issues on the airport are going to be asking the FAA to change things of operations that we don't control but are necessary in order for there to be noise remediation and so forth. But we'll have to see how that rounds go. I also want to point out, because I see her in the crowd, Ellen Weiniger from Grassroots Environmental has communicated with us on helping us to try to identify places that we can get information for air quality monitoring. We've had a noise monitoring system in place, but we have not had an extensive air quality monitoring system. So I want to publicly thank Ellen for sharing with us some dialogue. That is part of the investigation that's going on now. So whatever we have in terms of air quality, which we heard very clearly about at the meeting, that we would go forward from there. So with those different elements, I don't know if I missed anything that we needed to touch on. That gives you a status report from where we were at the end of the last public session, which was held at the end of June. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions from the press, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so you said you've been in dialogue with the Board of Legislators on, I guess you're calling it governance issue, privatization, whatever.
It's governance. That's what we're calling it. You can call it anything you want. It's changing who governs the airport. Go ahead.
We'll call it whatever I want. So there's a $1.1 billion deal. Talk to Larry, is that still on the table?
Well, as it stands now, every proposal that was sent to the Board of Legislators that was part of their dialogue and discussion died at the end of the last legislative session. So as of the first of the new year, we, the administration, has sent no document to the Board of Legislators for their consideration. They can at any point in time choose to deal with the Macquarie proposal or any of the other proposals that were out there at the time that they were there. We've met with Macquarie, we've met with Oak Tree, we've met with a new consortium that has Avports as one of their groups. We've had discussions so they could inform us of what their proposals are. But at this point, the dialogue with the Board of Legislators is informal, and it will become more formal when and if there's a decision to investigate one or more of these strategies.
So those deals are still on the table from Oak Tree and Macquarie.
I just explained to you, there's nothing on the table in the Board of Legislators as a document. If Macquarie, well, I'm answering your question if you want to hear the answer. If Macquarie wants to say the proposal that we had last year stands, it's a proposal. So it depends on what you consider on the table. If on the table means it's before the Board of Legislators for their consideration, it is not before the Board of Legislators for their consideration. If I propose to buy your house, is it on the table, or until you start to accurately consider my proposal to buy your house, right? So I think that answers your question. Next question. Yes, sir.
What are residents complaining about most? Is it,
Noise. I'd say noise far and away. I have gone to a couple of sites, and there's another one that I've yet to check out. I guess other people have done this, where the constant complaint is people who frankly live under an air flight path, and they're getting constant plane after plane after plane. You know, we heard one person say on Memorial Day at one of the public meetings it was like 20 some odd planes in an hour at a frequency that made it unlivable and unusable for their house. Now, when you live in this general close-in proximity to the airport, within, 5 miles of the airport, it's not just what planes are flying overhead, it's the general operations of the airport that represent noise to you. And you go a little further out, and you're dealing with the flight path of planes as they approach final descent into the runway. I'm told that it's more about planes arriving than planes departing, but that's anecdotal.
One other question. You said earlier you're looking for financial help with this.
Are we looking for what?
You're looking for financial help.
Yeah, we're looking for financial, absolutely.
Where that help from? Government,
Well,
airlines?
at this stage of the game, the financial help that we need is secondary to the policy change. We're looking to have a dialogue with FAA over how they've identified the equipment that flies into this airport, what noise abatement mechanicals are on the various flights. A plane can be a quieter or a louder airplane depending on how it's been constructed, what its noise abatements are. I'm told that many times it's the bigger jets that have that noise abatement equipment on it. It's the smaller aircraft that do not. But this will be part of the discussion with FAA. What can they require? We can't legally require as a county government that certain equipment have noise suppression devices on them. The FAA can do that. And then also we have to deal with this problem of the time of arrival and time of departure. We've had a voluntary curfew here, and it's pretty clear that the voluntary curfew is broken at whatever wish a pilot or an airline cares to do it. Because it is voluntary, it's not mandatory. The whole protections of the airport came over Westchester imposing a mandatory curfew and the court eliminating that curfew. Now, there are examples out there of other places that have fought for curfews. The ones that have curfews have been grandfathered in when the laws changed X number of years ago. And so we're having an investigation. This is in John's bailiwick to try to determine what legal process we have. But you know, if we decide that we're going to sue the FAA or we're going to try to do something by law, we have to have some reasonable expectation of success. No guarantee, but a reasonable expectation. So we've got to look at what's happened under other circumstances. We're investigating that now, and if we have an announcement about that, we'll make it when we have it. Yes, Tony, hang on. Tony next.
Because you're moving relatively aggressively on water, on noise, on air quality, but it sounds like on governance, you're taking a step back and pointing to the Board of Legislators.
Yes, exactly right. Because governance has always been a red herring issue, Tony. The governance of this airport has never been the main issue. The main issue at this airport is how does this airport serve its reason of existing, which is a transportation hub, and how do we make that transportation hub as least impactful to our air, our water, our noise, and our neighbors. The issue of governance was brought in by the last administration and turned the discussion of the airport into a financial discussion. How do you liquefy an asset here to help you balance your budget? That has never been the front edge of my interest. And let me tell you, although I wasn't in this position prior to January 1st, I served for 13 years in the Board of Legislators. Ken served for 11 years in the Board of Legislators. John served 4 years. We never once viewed the airport as a piggy bank to crack open. Now, we have a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, to look at every possible way to balance the county budget. And that's why I say we have an informal conversation with the Board of Legislators, because we're going to talk about everything. What are we going to do with sales tax? What are we going to do with energy controls? What are we going to do to collect revenue where it exists? And when I have a separate press conference to talk about how we're going to deal with the budget gap, I'll get into those things. But I think what's happened is that the target of what is the public policy of this airport was turned into how do we get into the money bank here, rather than it's a transportation hub and it has impact on neighbors and drinking water around it. That's the number one issue. Governance is a sideshow. So governance is a policy change which we have discussion with the Board of Legislators, and then there's some consensus. If the Board of Legislators, I'm looking at Nancy as one legislator, if the majority of the Board of Legislators or the majority of our administration come to one position or another, we'll work it out. It's a bad idea to have a policy, throw it to the Board of Legislators and force them to reject it. That's not the way policy should be, and that's why we had public meetings. Yes, Allie.
When should we expect the noise monitors, and when should we expect our next update?
The first one is here, so we're going to identify a site. to put it, based on some of the noise complaints that we've been hearing over the last several months. The remaining 9 will be in by the end of August, and we will deploy them accordingly. And then the beauty of them being portable is if there are areas that come in through the complaint process that haven't been monitored, we have the ability to move these around, obtain the data, make some analysis, and talk to the air traffic controllers, et cetera. So we're putting this in place right now. Which latter part? We'll get some feedbacks probably, we'll get it on like a monthly basis. It will be reported to the Airport Advisory Board, and then we'll do regular updates to the public. We want to make sure there's enough data so that we are making assessments based on the data, not just on some anecdotal information.
And let me just follow up to Allie, John, and then we'll go to you. Allie, the other thing is you want a certain amount of time in order to compare one year to the next. You can just imagine heating your house. Heating your house will be very high in December. It may be very low in the summertime, depending on air conditioning. You can't just take a 1-month reading in November and project that for the whole year. You need to have X number of months. Whether it's 2 months or 4 months or whatever it is, we're going to try to look at that, have comparable data, and see what that tells us in terms of the noise. So that's why the system comes in, it starts giving us data. I think what's going to happen is some of these monitoring systems are going to be in places where we didn't have them before. Right. So we won't have a baseline. Whatever the first readings is our baseline. But we've heard from people at these meetings that it's driving them crazy in areas. And so we have to verify. And when we can show those high numbers, that's what we go to the FAA with. Not just we're hearing anecdotes, but we have statistical data from monitoring station 1, monitoring station 2. We draw comparisons, and then we make the case for why it is we need whatever it is we need in order to actually reduce the noise. Okay, John? Well, that's why I say the issue has always been governance, not privatization. We have a private arrangement here now to operate the airport with Avports. Within a private situation, I contract you to do something. I don't turn it over to you, you give me money, and then you make all the decisions. So leases are, and by the way, the length of the lease has a lot to do with it. Somebody will say, well, it was a lease. It's a 40-year lease. 40 years from now, you can drive by Green Union Cemetery and let me know how this all turned out, because I won't be here for 40 years. That's a very long lease period of time. That's close to being the equivalent of selling. Yeah, John, I'm not going to live to be 105. So my point being that if we decide to contract something out, and you could subdivide anything, but we want to make sure, and I think this came through loud and clear from what we heard, is we don't want to lose the ability to control decisions made here that impact people's lives. And by the way, the people also include the traveling public that go through here. So, what happens is when you contract out something like that, first thing that happens, rates go up. All of a sudden somebody's saying, hey, I'm paying $30 at the parking garage. Well, we don't control it anymore. Somebody's paying you money for the privilege to run it, and they say, well, we're going to get our investment back. And so it's not just, there's a perception that this is all about the neighbors being angry on changing governance. This could be the traveling public that could also be poorly served. It could be the businesses of Westchester County that are poorly served as well if the decision's made. I'm sorry? Well, it's part of a discussion. As I've said that already, there's nothing that I haven't ruled it out, but I have said that, my basic attitude is not to give up control of something that's this impactful. And I've said that, look, I had a campaign last year where I disagreed with my predecessor, and I said I don't like the general idea, not of having public-private partnerships. We have one with Liberty Lines that we hope to announce very soon. We have plenty of public-private partnerships, and those are good things if the discussion is based on what's good for the taxpayer and the citizen as well as the business. I spent 20 years in business. I know what a deal looks like that's good for me and good for you. I'm not sure that's what I saw in some of these other deals, but we're going through each deal separately and one at a time, and we're not drawing a general philosophy. We're trying to be pragmatic in each case. And I would say that when I say we're going to dialogue with the Board of Legislators, going back to Tony's question, it's important to understand that means that citizens should talk to their county legislators too, because we were all county legislators. We're part of the decision process loop too. It's not just what the administration thinks. Other questions? Yes, sir.
sent into the airport, has that ever been looked into to see if there could be a safe, steeper descent so the planes could be up higher before they get closer?
I think, and I know when you spoke at one of the public meetings, you made that point. That's part of the dialogue to have with FAA. They would control what would represent the proper approach to the airport and how they make that decision. Without knowing all the ramifications of changing the angle of descent, I'm not a pilot. I might theorize something that may or may not be safe, but we would try to deal with that issue because you do have a situation where the lower you come, the closer you are to the ground as you go in, the more noise you project on the ground. I mean, common sense tells me that. How steep an angle, what the approach is, that'll fall to conversations with FAA. Other questions? Have we covered most everything that we have? Jonathan's ready to ask a question. Let me make sure I got the press covered. Yes, John has a question. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak as modulated as I can.
I got the gist of it, but basically I wanted to know, the proposals that were given last year, are they pretty much dead in the water?
It's the same question that I was asked before. Let me try to explain it one more time. We have received proposals. Last year, there were 3 entities that proposed plans. Those proposals were presented to the administration, and they had a Board of Legislators 3-person committee that recommended one of them. That recommendation was built into the budget that the county executive sent to the Board of Legislators. The Board of Legislators rejected signing on to that arrangement. And because that was sent down as a singular proposal to the Board of Legislators, it was in their agenda of items to be discussed. The year ends, a new term begins. There is nothing in the Board of Legislators as a proposal. Now, we've met with Macquarie. Macquarie, if invited to, most likely would submit a proposal. They might revise it. They've expressed an interest. If the question is, are they still interested in it? Is Oak Tree still interested in doing it? Yes, it's still on the table. But I don't want you to think that the proposals that were specifically there are proposals that we are now saying, let's look at which one of these proposals. We're having a discussion about, do we change the governance of the airport? And if we decide that we're prepared to change the governance, the Board of Legislators is a partner to that decision. That's what was missing last year and the year before that. So if the Board of Legislators thinks that it's a good idea, and it's 17 different people with 17 different opinions, no one of them speaks on behalf of the whole board. Lord knows I learned that as chairman of the board. And in addition to that, we have to decide if any of the deals as was structured are worth pursuing in that regard. So I've kept it open-ended. That's why I can answer John's question by saying, yeah, the proposals are there, they exist. We've met with people. We haven't said get lost, we're not talking to you, but we haven't taken one of those proposals and advanced it and sent it to the board and said, analyze this proposal because we would like to put this into the budget. Now, just for purposes, the whole purpose of doing these proposals was, in the prior administration, to deliver revenue so as to deliver a certain level of taxation. We have not yet, as a budget team, as a team looking at the budget, come up with our plan for 2019. My understanding is from this morning's meeting, we're expecting departmental budget proposals to come back to us on the 31st. We're going to have some dialogue by the 10th of September. At that point, we'll look at what our budget looks like. If the prior administration's philosophy was, we want to do these deals in order to get the money to balance the budget, we want to look at, do we balance the budget in other ways without having to look at these deals? So that's why the question isn't, are they on the table? Are we looking at doing the deals? The proposals are there. They're part of a dialogue about governance, and that's why I jump on that definition. It's very important to understand it is not just privatization, it is governance. We privatize our bus service in a public-private partnership with Liberty Line, but decisions made about our transportation system still reside with us. It's still a matter of governance, even as we contract out the service. You're asking me to answer a hypothetical, and it happens all the time in this business. I understand it, and you can understand why I dodge it, because there are other factors to be looked at before you can comment and determine what you're going to do. As an example, if balancing the budget right now was possible, and we knew it absolutely possible with no tax increase, property tax increase, because sales tax had grown, we had all these outside revenues, and we didn't have to touch the airport, then we wouldn't be looking at anything as part of a financial deal to balance the budget. We would then make a decision, do we think it's wise to change the governance of the airport for some other reason? And if so, does the Board of Legislators think it's a wise decision? The only reason why people are saying, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Is because it was tied into the finances of the county. And we are taking that out of the discussion. We're not viewing this building as a piggy bank. It is not a piggy bank. It is a transportation hub. If you talk to business people, if you talk to travelers, they don't view this as a piggy bank. They view this as a transportation hub. If you talk to the neighbors around it or the people under the flight path, they don't want to hear you're making decisions about this airport as a piggy bank. They want to know that you care about how it operates. And I know it sounds like I'm picking words, but I'm walking a very fine line, but I've thought it through in the direction we're leading in. And this meeting is a continuation of leading in that direction. Okay. Anybody else I missed? Are we good? All right. Any one-on-one interviews are welcome to have it. Thank you very much for your time.